We're
What's
live.
up, guys?
Awesome.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing great.
It's Thursday. We
It's
skipped a
Thursday.
day.
I'm a little off because our Wednesdays.
No, this is what we do on Wednesdays
I know
for
people
the SaaS coach thing, and
for those of you that were sad, no SaaS coach.
I actually
on
got
Wednesday.
like 6 letters in the mail.
Yeah.
From yesterday. People must have sent them right after, and they said, they
express
it's just
delivery.
prime. Yeah, a couple. I felt kind of like Johnny Cash because most of them were from prisons.
Yeah.
So
That's
got
where
some letters.
Most of our viewers are.
Yes, exactly. That's where they're watching us because most prisoners do want to know how to retain users for software applications.
Absolutely.
That's definitely what
You
they
got to have
want.
a plan.
You do. I mean, if you're there and you have nothing else to do, you code out a little bit of a, incarceration app, whatever it might be, and you got to make sure you retain all those users.
So is that today's topic, the incarceration app?
It is the incarceration app, and of any users that should understand how someone gets kept somewhere, it should be prisoners because they can't go anywhere. So
retention.
Retention.
That's what we're talking about.
So we're here today. We've got SaaS Coach again.
Yep.
This is our second series. The first series was all about website conversion.
Yeah.
This series is all about retention of users. How do we reduce churn rates and make sure that we're keeping as many people that we spent purchasing through marketing and that type of stuff. And so we're on principle 4 today.
Yeah, and we're talking about data.
You sound excited.
Can
you say that again with a little bit of
data, like that? Am I getting there? A little bit closer.
So everybody, we are talking about data today. Who doesn't love data? So it's, got goals?
Got goals.
Get data, because that's what it's about. And I do think this is one of the most important things. And I think we've talked about this in a couple of our past episodes, is touching on data, because really it's a linchpin of being able to understand a lot of these different factors. If we want to retain users, we can look at all these principles and strategies that we have, but really to prioritize what we want to do in any of these principles, we have to leverage data to help us understand where do we prioritize our efforts and make the most changes. And so data really is, although it's principle number 4, and it's somewhat in the middle of our 10 principles, it is probably the most foundational to everything.
Yeah, so data is something that we've heard a ton about. If you have a software business, you're using data, you're relying on it. The way data has been pushed over the last 5 to 10 years, big data, right? We've heard so much about it, but I think what becomes a little bit frustrating about it is how do you properly contextualize it, use it, and then use it as an agent of change to make improvements.
Yeah.
Data by itself doesn't really mean anything. It's essentially worthless.
Well, and it's amazing how many companies we work with that collect data, and whether that's on a marketing front, that they've got Google Analytics on their site, or it's on a software side, and they're tracking various analytics of how people utilize the software. It's amazing how often that data just kind of sits. And maybe every once in a while it's looked into, but it's really not necessarily a habit of their culture. And so I do think, even though we don't talk about it being a habit, I think that is something with this whole data piece is, how are you integrating it into your organization to look at it every single day, to really be looking at the key KPIs, and then put it into a structure that you can actually get value out of. We a lot of times talk about critical paths, what's the path we expect people to go through, and what are the different data points along there, and then if people aren't hitting our goals, what do we need to do to change to make sure that they, we adjust that. And so that's kind of the foundational, but it's really about a rhythm and habit of making sure that you're really making data an important piece.
And you're going to show a process here in a little bit that I'm excited about. That's something that kind of walks people through those. What are those steps and how that can be done? To me, that's so important, because if you don't know what to do with the data, it's meaningless.
So let's start out. I think one of the first places is there are specific softwares out there, ironically, for analytics just for software and apps. On the app side, we use Firebase a lot, which is a Google product, but there are a ton of other softwares out there. Now, you could obviously put Google Analytics into a lot of these different platforms, but these software analytics sites and platforms that you can integrate really have some specific features that help you get insights that are very useful for SaaS and software companies. We just have 2 screenshots up here, but some simple things like visit frequency and content origin. And then on this one, you can see total active customers, your monthly revenue, what's the net expansion of new users on a regular basis, and then also what's the churn rate, so you can see the positive and the negative, and then even into forecasted churn rate to look at what's happened in the past and what users are doing to actually forecast out ahead what potential retention losses you might have.
So those insights that really matter to the SaaS business owner. Yeah.
And we'll show another graph in a second, I think in a couple of slides, where it's really about cohorts, where people come in and then how often they keep coming back week by week, which is really a true guide point for whether you're retaining people and can give you a sense of, is there a timing standpoint that causes people to, turn off or stop using the software. So there's definitely, the first point is there are a lot of really cool analytics products out there specifically for software companies, and they give you insights that other, typical website analytics platforms can't. Yeah. So if you're not using those, Firebase or some of these others, and it's easy to find, we use a couple of different products, I think you should really be looking at making sure you're integrating the right tool. So this is my biggest part, Tony.
Yeah.
And this is not just for software, but also for marketing. And it's probably, whenever I talk about analytics, this is probably the number one thing, and it's interpretation. So we've got a ton of data and information, but what does it mean? And I really think this is the place that most people struggle. It's not black and white. There are a lot of different shades in there to how you interpret, and you go through the process. And if you make a bad interpretation, it could either do nothing or actually make things worse. And so this whole side of really being able to have a process and think about how you interpret data is just like one of the most important things.
Yeah, it starts there.
Yeah, exactly. And so obviously the first step is to capture data, and that goes back to what we just talked about, is having the right tools and integrating them, because if you're not capturing the right information that then can be visualized in the right way, you're actually not going to get what you need to make these decisions. So first we have to make sure we're capturing the data in the right way and the right amount of data and using the right platform. The next is kind of analyze. So this is looking across and pulling out, specific critical numbers that we want to pay attention to. So from an analyze standpoint, we want to look at certain KPIs that we want to track, key performance indicators. That's weekly retention. That could be total number of active users. And some of those KPIs we really have to figure out on our own, like total active users. For some clients, we may look at that as, how many users log in every day versus how many users log in every month based on the type of usage that this software might have. And we want to understand active users and not just users. And I've seen that issue is that, people will put up a big KPI of how many users they have. But if you've got free trials and, accounts that have left or just kind of sitting there, that doesn't really count as an active user. You really want to pay attention to activity, because that is a signal towards retention as well, because if they're inactive, they're most likely to churn. So we really want to look at, what are the right KPIs, how do we determine what's right for our business, and then make sure that we're watching and just seeing how they benchmark against our goals. The next is integrate. So for me, one of the things that people also mess with analytics is pulling data from different sources or different reports, and kind of cross-pollinating those and figuring out insights based on how you look at things. And so as an example, you may start and look at information about retention and weekly usage, but then how do you cross that with maybe regional? So are they US based? Are they Canada? And you're kind of cross-pollinating data or segmenting it to make sure that you're looking at it in smaller pieces. And so the thing that I see a big mistake is they just kind of, people will go in and look at the default screens, they won't add any filters or segments, or they won't go to other reports and say, oh, this insight combined with this insight, tell me something unique.
There's more layers there. It's not just that global view. Sometimes when you peel it back, there's something significant that stands out.
And it's not one number. Like that's the other thing is these are all connected pieces. And so analytics is not looking at this number and saying it's off. I've got to figure this out based off of that one number. It's going and looking at everything connected to get a better picture of what you're looking at. Validate. So we typically talk about validation just to make sure that we're right. If we're now looking at data, we understand our KPIs, we're pulling things together, it's how do we make sure that that data is correct and that it's, giving us the right insights at the end of the day. So there's just a little bit of a step of validation and kind of checking it. A lot of times for us, that's going back and comparing it to past dates to just see, okay, did something change? Is this accurate? Whatever it might be. You'd be surprised, even in these platforms, you'll sometimes get, anomalies of tracking that something went out or there isn't data available, and what you don't want to do is make a big decision based off of something that's a misnomer.
Anomaly,
Yep. Then interpret. So this is obviously the crux of this and the hardest part. I typically say that analytics, each one can mean a different thing. As an example on the marketing side I'll use is bounce rate. If you've got a bounce rate where people are coming to a page and leaving right away, and you can have this in a software too, is it something that they don't have a clear action of where to go next? Is it the overall look of the page and the user experience, that they don't have confidence? Are they not being presented with the right instructions, or is the message not match what their expectation was prior to the click? And so when you look at one number, there can be 10 different things that might be influencing what's happening with that number. And so we've got to kind of list that out. And then again, that's combined with this integrate and validate to make interpretations of what we really think is happening. And sometimes we may have to grab other platforms to do that. So if we're seeing a number in our analytics, maybe we need to go to a Hotjar that does heat mapping to help us get a better picture of, are we interpreting what's happening what right?
Behavior is.
Yep. Yeah. So it's about that interpretation. I really think that is the place people get tripped up, because if you're not an expert in the field, you may not know all the reasons that a number, what it could be causing, but then you also might make guesses that are just not based off of what you've seen over the past.
And I was just going to throw out there that this could sound very intimidating, but I think it's important to know that most likely you don't have to just guess what variable is the issue. We're going to get to testing in a moment.
Right.
That's a huge piece, but that will help you determine what, with the whole interpretation process.
100%. We're definitely going to be talking about testing, and the cool thing when we get to the testing piece is that can give us concrete information versus, analytics. Really, it's easy to make assumptions and make misinterpretations, but A/B testing and other testing can definitely reduce that significantly. Next is hypothesize. So, if we've now interpreted what we think is happening, what do we hypothesize is going to influence a positive change to that metric? And so, we may come up with ideas and say, when someone gets in to our dashboard, we're getting a lot of people that don't interact with this primary feature or don't set up, an account. Okay, well, now that we understand why, maybe there weren't instructions, now we have to hypothesize, okay, this is the change that can influence something better. Then we decide, and so we have multiple ideas of what can be done. We make some decisions based off some logical thinking of what's the right move, and then obviously the last piece is to execute. So there's a lot of steps to this, but again, if our goal is to use data to make improvements, and it's something like our churn rate is 10% of users leave, and we can get that down to 5% because we go through this process, it's worth a lot of dollars and revenue and all of that to make sure you go through the process and do this right. So we kind of talked about this report, but this is I like this view of basically what you have as cohorts. So it in Firebase, it actually breaks users up by different cohorts when they came in, and then it's showing their access over weeks. So obviously, the first week that a user signs up, we've got 100%. But then the second week, we see that 25% came back. So that's only 1 out of 4 came back in the second week. And then what the cohorts do are show us, how is it changing over time? So this next week, 24% came back. So we went down a little bit, and then we went back up to where we were, then we went up, then we went way down. And so are we making changes in the software? Are there differences in the types of users that are coming in? But then, so we can compare that over time, but then we can see out that by week 5, only 7% of our users have come back. And so we can look at and say, is there an area where there's a big drop off? This is pretty natural progression going from like 25 to 16 to 13. Our biggest drop off was from week 0 to 1. This is why we've said with a lot of our clients and engagements that first week, that period of like onboarding and first use, that's where we want to come up with a million ideas that are just fantastic. How do you wow someone the first login, and then during that first week just provide a ton of value? And whether that's a consumer app and it's entertainment value, or it's a B2B app and you really need to deliver the value of what they're trying to solve, the pain they're trying to solve. But that first week, that's usually where the biggest drop off always happens.
And I think it's to that point, and then that first 0 to 1, that's the point of kind of indoctrination, right? Get someone to fully buy in and believe they've made the decision to purchase. Now it's, yes, this is what I needed, and I'm going to use this thing. So I think there's a different planning is gonna kind of level off a little bit from there, but that's critical.
And there is usually a drop off in the first week because you get a lot of demos and stuff like that. But that does not mean all the tactics that we're talking about through this series and others, that in that first week, if you really do it right, that you can have more positive numbers, during that first week. And so, we've sat down with clients in the past and really said, okay, let's break up the first like 4 days that someone signs up for a software and just look at all the different elements. I actually think later on in the series, I'll talk about something called experience mapping, which I think is really cool, and it's a process of really looking at how you look at the emotional, physical, mental experiences that people have, and you map that out.
That's cool.
And so if you take a 4-day period, that's probably the most important period of your software, and you can really make sure that you're delivering a ton of value. It's a great experience. You're communicating a ton. You're answering questions. That's where that number, it's 25%, but it could be 50%, and that influences every number thereafter. And so really important to look at that and then figure out strategies to fix it. And then the next piece that we talk about is looking at users who stay versus users who go. So obviously we're talking about retention. We can easily separate and see data on users that are staying and coming back, and then separating the users that, what was their experience during the time prior to them leaving.
And so do more of this, less of that.
Right? More stay, less go. And so some of the things, what features did they use most? So obviously, I want to know for the people that stay, did they go to a certain feature and then did they use it every day and they got locked into it? Versus the people that went, did they not find that feature, or did they go somewhere else because maybe those types of users that leave had a different need or pain point? And so you kind of evaluate what was the difference in the features that they used. The people that stayed, did they visit support pages often? What devices were they on? Could you get an insight from, people on desktop tend to stay and, stay as users versus people on mobile and tablets leave? Are there insights like that? Where did they come from? So did they sign up from a demo page, or were they a referral? So what's the original source of the user? What's their demographic, firmographic information? Can we capture that when people sign up, and we know that CEOs use it for a week and leave, but marketing managers end up staying and using it? Or same thing with age or whatever else we can gather. Are they from specific countries? Again, region. If our software isn't language accessible for multiple regions, are we getting users that could be valuable customers, but they're leaving because they can't really access the software appropriately? And what was their onboarding experience? What is that first 4 days that we just talked about? And then on the users who go, same thing. Features, did they check out? How much data did they put in? I want to know, did those users put in just one piece of data and leave? Or did they fill in a bunch? Because what that tells me is if they filled in a lot of data, they took time, they took effort, and then something was wrong. If they put nothing in, there might never have been the interest. What are their devices? Same thing. Where did they come from? Demographics, firmographics. All of those same questions we want to compare the people that stayed versus went, and are there unique insights that we can get to determine why? So that's an easy exercise for sure.
Good stuff.
And then talking about A/B testing, which was the thing that we were just saying, where basically you can do an experiment, and on a page you can send, if there's 1,000 users that visit your dashboard, version A of the dashboard has analytics at the top and a button that says go to the next step, versus the other one brings in a wizard that explains like this is what you do next, and you literally 500 go to version A, 500 to version B, and you see which one has different analytics associated to your KPIs. And so that really does, when you can test like that, it truly does give you concrete information.
It's not just well, I favor this over that, and because so often decisions are made on features and what should be placed where that we're going off of instinct, and that's fine. We got to start somewhere, but once you have this evidence, we gotta respect the user behavior.
Yeah, and it's funny how many times I think people are in denial of it. When we look at analytics and we're making interpretations and assumptions, we're bringing our bias into it, right?
Sure.
And so especially the software founder that has this great idea of like, this is the pain it solves and this is how valuable it is, and that feature to me is amazing and it's life-changing, and then you go in and you do A/B testing and you can really see, okay, no one ever touches that, no one's hovering over that filter button that you think is so important. We can really see these things and understand what we need to do right. So it is that concrete, unbiased data that tells us the true story of what's happening.
I think that's important just in discussing data altogether, is you want to go into it realizing that your ego might be bruised, right? Because some of these decisions you're making early on prior to having the data or having the latest data, and these trends are going to tell us things sometimes that we don't like to hear. But remember, the reason we're doing this is to improve the performance, improve the retention.
And I think if there's been a theme across every episode we've done on all our shows and series, blah, 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 is how do you reduce bias? I'm huge, and you've seen this in all my shows, is about like creating logical approaches to things. Stuff that's ambiguous or amorphous, how do you really make sure that you have a logical, structured approach to determining it? And then same on the other side with data and analytics, that you're not just coming in with assumptions, interpretations, or even feedback from users that can be biased as well. You know, you may have Joe that calls you up and says, I hate this feature, it's not working right, and the interpretation is, wow, we've got to change that. But that's, you know, one data point. Or it's even someone that's very biased because, you know, maybe they have a specific need or opinion. And I see that a lot too, is founders will, you know, get their friends' insight, and it's really just biased information back. Again, across everything we do, whether it's developing a logical, structured process or pulling in data and doing testing, the goal is to reduce as much assumption and bias as possible in both marketing, retention, and all of these other areas. So that's what's really important. And then really the last thing that I thought I'd talk about in analytics and goals was really Net Promoter Score. So if you're not familiar with this, it's a very simple metric, that a lot of software companies use to basically determine different factors of success. So it's one score, and it basically asks, you know, would you recommend us to someone else? And so if someone scores a 0 to 6, they're typically a detractor. You know, they are going to require proactive outreach to really mitigate any brand damage because they're not going to refer you. They're not particularly satisfied. You know, people that are 7 to 8 are the passives. You know, they're susceptible to competitive offerings, so they're out there and something might come up, you know, and they're left out of the NPS calculation just because they are that middle ground. And then finally, the promoters, those 9s and 10s, where they're really loyal and they're likely to tell others about you, and then they fuel viral growth through word of mouth.
They're evangelists. They're the ones
they're
that
evangelists
share
at the end of the day.
Yep.
And that's what it is. So Net Promoter Score. What is the net of the people that would promote you? And so it's a very simple metric, but it's a very powerful one, and it's become almost an industry standard now that you can really judge a lot of the success based off of, hey, would you recommend me or my software to someone else?
Yeah.
So, and I'm seriously asking, would you recommend me personally to someone else?
I have to answer this.
Yeah, am I a 0 to a 10 from a personal perspective? We're asking, can you give me a score just now?
Yeah, maybe as soon as we wrap up here, I'll give you that score.
So that must be a 6. But
if you're lucky.
Yeah, if I'm lucky. So, you know, Net Promoter Score, that can be a great one. There's a couple tools out there that can make it easy to capture that data. But man, is that a nice metric to show up on a screen, you know, in your office and say, hey, we want to have X Net Promoter Score. Guys, what are the tactics we have to do from a high level to get here and do this? Yep. It's a strategic metric that you can really use as a software company.
Yeah, I think that's a good piece to work from, is that, you know, I put that as the goal of how do we get more people who are raving fans as opposed 100%. To how do we understand them better? What are they using? What are the features? How are they using it? As opposed to, like earlier, when you compare people who stay, people who go, you know, what are those people doing? Well, why are they missing this feature? So there's a lot that goes into it, but take the cues from especially those raving fans and on the other side.
Well, and that actually does bring another point up for me for data and for, you know, A/B testing and, you know, customer feedback, is don't just get your information from the best customers.
Yeah.
You know, it's great, you know, you send out that survey to the people that have been a customer for 10 years, but what's the survey, or how do you test, or how do you look at the data for the people that came in, left a bad review, and, you know, didn't use it for very long? Because I don't know, we naturally probably want to hear good news, but that doesn't help us grow and scale.
Yeah, that'll never be a natural representation of the marketplace.
Yeah,
just a pool of promoters. So if we want to be honest with ourselves, you gotta.
And I wonder if you could use, we use pre-mortems a little bit here, is where, you know, when we're in a project or we're working with a client, we'll get in a room ahead of time or in the middle of a project and say, what can go wrong? You know, at the end of this project, the client's really pissed off and this is not good. What happened to get them there? but we're doing this 6 months before it might happen. And everybody in the room, their job is to come in and give 1 or 2 reasons that they think that this went off the rails and there was a problem. I think that could be the same thing for software teams. You look at some data, you go through some of these tests, but then you sit in the room and say, okay, our detractors, let's kind of look at a pre-mortem. What could go wrong?
Yeah.
And that can be a nice brainstorming idea. I love pre-mortems for what we do, our projects, and how we engage with clients, but that can also be used on the software side as well.
Understanding and exploring those vulnerabilities or potential is huge. So I think very smart, kind of proactive approach to addressing that.
Yeah, 100%. Cool. Well, I think that's all of our slides. What do we got next week? Let's take a look. So principle number 5, which we're going to be talking about hopefully Wednesday, if Tony doesn't, do what he did yesterday, which is, I think you were in the corner crying and had a bunch of candy or something and didn't want to do the show.
That was yesterday?
I thought that was this morning. Or maybe that was this morning. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think you had eggs in the corner this morning. Your customer service needs to be, wait for it, legendary. So,
I like that.
The voice?
Yeah, that was good.
Welcome, everybody. This is the show where we're going to be talking about how your software can become legendary. But seriously, so I don't know if you, what's the show where they say this? I forget anyways. But anyways, seriously, customer service, can it be legendary? And so that's what helps create raving mad fans that are 9s or 10s on that net promoter score, come back, keep paying those dollars. This is definitely a huge principle. So we're going to be talking about some cool ways to look at customer service as a software company next week, and that should be pretty fun.
Awesome.
We'll
see you guys next time.
Yeah, that sounds great, Tony. I'm excited to talk to you next week, and hopefully you guys will keep tuning in. If you've got questions or anything else that you need, just reach out to us at the little number below. Oh, no number. Never mind. But thanks for showing up. Where's your announcer voice? Where's your radio voice? Welcome to the movie phone.
I'll do play-by-play, you do color.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
Take care.
Woo.